Hey everyone, welcome back. William Fauché here. I want to preface this video by saying that while I'll be using Unreal in this tutorial, just about everything in this video can be applied to any renderer, whether you're using Unreal yourself, or Blender, V-Ray, Redshift, Octane, whatever. It's all more or less the same because lighting is lighting. And while there are a few technical differences from one program to another, the fundamentals are all the same. Now, I get a lot of questions about how to do nighttime lighting because I'll admit, it's tricky. But before you skip ahead to the good stuff, wait a second. We need to observe how cinematographers light their night scenes in actual movies. I promise you, this is going to help you. Bear with me. Understanding how movies are lit for night shots is essential to getting a good result. Let's take a look at some classic film shots here and break down the lighting they used. And first off, you'll notice when you look at these, you may realize that something feels a bit off. That is not real moonlight. You can clearly tell that this is a big, bright, artificial light source. We can clearly see that the light is coming from two different directions at once, which is a telltale sign that it's not natural light. Why don't they just use moonlight? The reason being is because moonlight is way too dark. Sunlight is roughly 100,000 lux in brightness, while moonlight is between 0.25 and 1 lux, which means the sun is 100 to 400,000 times brighter than moonlight. Even with modern cameras with incredible low light performance, it's just not enough light to nail a correct exposure without getting too much noise in the shot. You're going to need to crank up that gain or the ISO to ridiculous numbers, and that's just no bueno. But secondly, notice how all the shots here are very cold or blue in color temperature. All of them. Which is funny, because moonlight is actually not blue. Science tells us that moonlight is actually a bit more red than sunlight, and has a color temperature of about 4,000 Kelvin, which is very warm. If moonlight actually has a warm white color to it, why do we light and grade moonlight to appear like a cold blue? TLDR, it's called the Purkinje effect. In basic terms, our eyes will shift peak luminosity toward the blue end of the color spectrum at low illumination levels. So our eyes will be using rods instead of cones in the retina depending on the available light. With that knowledge, why do films keep using blue to represent nighttime shots? Honestly, it's probably because it's a convention that audiences have come to recognize, just like how 24 FPS feels right when you watch a movie, and 48 FPS feels a bit weird. This kind of goes to show that art is very subjective, but to give you a visual example, here's a shot of me with a white balance card to get a neutral white balance when outside during the full moon. It was bright enough to see my own shadow, and if I didn't know any better, it almost looks like a lightly cloudy day. Now the lighting here looks very flat because all of that snow is acting like a huge reflector, but under normal, non-snowy conditions, you would get a lot more directionality to the moonlight. But here's another photo example, and it really does look like daylight when exposed correctly. Remember, moonlight is just way too dark to shoot well-exposed, clean video in, so cinematographers really need to compensate with artificial lighting to make things feel like they are moonlit without actually using moonlight. There are lots of ways to fake this, but using huge bright light sources, practical lights, or what we call a day for night grade, which is the process of actually shooting your footage during the day in broad sunlight, getting the benefits of having more light to see by and work with, and then they color grade that footage in post to make it look like a nighttime shot by adjusting the highlights, the exposure, and the white balance. Sometimes they even go so far as to add some sky replacements in post for added effect. It's all a huge hack. It's total fakery, making us believe it's a night shot without actually needing to shoot at night. And that is what we're going to do right now. We're going to light this shot right here entirely from scratch, right after this sponsored message. So a big thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. As you're all well aware by now, Skillshare is an online learning platform you can use to find thousands of inspiring, high-quality classes in order to learn any skills you've ever dreamt of picking up. Need to learn about getting started in Unreal for ArchViz? Skillshare had you covered with Yahya Jassam's class on Unreal Engine for Architecture. As a freelancer myself, I'm trying to learn more about SEO, and Rand Fishkin's Introduction to SEO, Strategy for Entrepreneurs, has taught me just about everything I need to know on the topic. Skillshare's classes are curated, they're ad-free, new premium classes come out every week, and it's worth mentioning that the entire catalog of classes now offers subtitles in Spanish, French, Portuguese, and German. So the first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link down below will get a 1-month free trial so you can start learning right away on the go, even on your phone. And now, let's get started in Unreal. Alright, so now that we're in Unreal, the first thing you're going to notice is that I'm using UE4. And there's a few reasons I'm not using UE5 at the moment. First and foremost is because foliage just does not look quite as good in UE5 yet. So I'm sticking with UE4 right now, primarily for stability and slightly better quality you get with foliage assets. And there's a few other reasons as well, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So you'll see here, I'm pretty much exclusively using Megascan assets here, including the trees. The trees are all the brand new Megascan tree assets, so you can recreate the scene yourself very easily. So what we're going to do here is we're going to delete every single light in the scene and start off with a blank slate. And just like that, you'll see we've got nothing left. It's totally dark. Let's start from scratch. So the first thing I like to do before doing anything at all is to establish a sky. And in this environment, we don't really see the sky that much, but you may want to have a starry night sky. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the content browser, and in the engine content folder, make sure that you have the show engine content button turned on here. We're going to search for sky, and we're going to filter by blueprint class. And here we have the BP sky sphere. We're going to drag and drop this into our scene like that. And you'll see, now we have a sky. Now this sky blueprint has been around since the day Unreal Engine 4 came out, pretty much. It is old, but it is pretty useful to get a kind of a basic sky system in there if you need it. So what we're going to do now is with the BP sky sphere selected, we're going to go to the details panel and we're going to adjust the sun height right here. Turn this down like that. And next, let's say something like that. There we go. And now we're going to change the star's brightness right here and crank that up a little bit. And you'll see that's a very simple and effective way to get stars in your sky. Now, the texture is not that great, but you can go ahead and change that in the material itself if you so desire. So if I go here and open up this material instance dynamic and open this master material, if I zoom out, you'll see here in the sky colors, there's a texture here called T_sky stars. And you can use any tileable star texture that you want and replace the default one, just so you know. But for now, I'm going to leave this like that because I don't really need any stars, because I don't really need anything better. Then going back to my sequence, going back to my camera view, the next step involves creating a directional light, and the directional light is going to be our moonlight, so to speak. So I'm going to go to lights and drag and drop a directional light in my scene like that. I gotta move it closer so I can select it more easily. And two things, make sure we set it to movable. And in the search detailed panel, again, I'm gonna search for atmosphere. And we're gonna turn on atmosphere sunlight. The only reason I have this checked on is because now I can use the Control-L shortcut to move and rotate the directional light and really fine-tune it the way I want it to. It's really just a handy tip that is good to know about. So what I want is for my moonlight, so to speak, to really highlight our hero asset. And our hero prop here, our main subject, is this lantern in the back over here, right? So I want to make sure that my directional light is really highlighting the edges here. I really want it to give a nice rim light to it. So I'm going to fine tune it kind of like this until it really illuminates all of those edges. Because when it comes to lighting nighttime scenes, silhouette is probably the most important thing. Silhouette is what you're going to see, it's what's going to catch those edges, it's what's going to make things pop and stand out from the rest. Keep that in mind, because we're going to be working a lot with silhouette in the fog and silhouettes with rim lighting specifically. So keep that in mind. And now I might increase my intensity of my sunlight to like 20 or something. Just make it a little bit brighter, make things pop a little bit more. It helps the trees get a little bit more illuminated as well. But yeah, you can play around with that for now. Obviously, we don't see anything. The lighting here, it's too dark. We have some interesting silhouettes, but that's about it. The next step involves adding some fog, because the fog here, especially in Unreal, is really going to help us get that depth that we need. So let's go ahead and create that right now. So we're going to go to Visual Effects here, Exponential Height Fog, and drag this into our scene. And just like that, we're starting to get somewhere, right? It went from looking like total crap to this in one click. But first, there are some critically important things we need to change before we move on. The first of which is changing one of your project settings. So we're going to go to the Settings tab up top here, go to Project Settings, and we're going to search for Fog up here. And here is where you want to have Support Sky Atmosphere Affecting Height Fog. Make sure this is turned on. You may have to restart Unreal. If you do, go ahead and do so before moving on. Now, once that project setting has been changed, we're going to select our exponential height fog and go to the Details panel, and we need to set the fog and scattering color to black and set the directional and scattering color here to black as well. The reason we're doing that is because exponential height fog is purely additive, and we're going to be using volumetric fog. Okay, so we want to make sure that only the volumetric fog is affecting the fog, so to speak. So the next step is to scroll down a little bit further and turn on volumetric fog here. Now you'll see, okay, this looks different, not great, different. What do we need to do now? The next step is we need to select our directional light and go to the Search Details panel and search for Ray, because we're going to turn off ray tracing here for several reasons. A, it's going to make our foliage look better in our trees. B, ray trace shadows don't work with volumetric fog very well. The ray trace shadows don't cast shadows on volumetric fog. I did make a tutorial about this last year, but that was in 4.26, and in 4.27, that hack broke. So unfortunately, we're going to have to turn off ray tracing for the directional light to get our fog to shadow correctly. If you're using UE5, you don't need to worry about this. It's going to be just fine, because fog is properly shadowed in UE5. This is purely a UE4 issue. So we're going to go here and turn off cast ray tracing shadows, and you'll see, okay, this is starting to look a bit more interesting. Right now we got some fog in there. We got some fog kind of shining through. We got a bit more depth in our scene. If I toggle the fog on and off before and after, big difference. And I'm going to hide the fog and toggle the ray trace shadows. Pay attention to the trees. Look at the difference it makes on the leaves themselves. This is with ray tracing on and off. On and off. So you'll see we get a little bit more of a lush feeling with ray tracing off. So this is very nice if you don't have an RTX GPU. So I'm going to turn on the fog again. And now, in my directional light, I'm going to go ahead and boost the fog a little bit. I'm going to, by increasing the volumetric scattering intensity, I'm going to set that to 3. And now you'll see, wow, boom, just like that, we've got way more depth to our scene. The whole thing feels way more alive. See, we kind of got these nice God rays shining through, but if you do this in your scene, you're probably not going to get the same result. Now, the reason why things look so good right now is because I carefully laid out the scene to get this desired effect. I placed all the trees perfectly to get the fog shining through, kind of like God Raid would shine through a window. Let me get out of camera view here and get closer to show you what I mean. Notice how here I've got this nice God ray shining through here, because I essentially made a window right here. I placed a whole bunch of trees and a shadow blocker up top here to fake a window, so to speak, to make sure that the volumetric fog shines exactly where I want it to. Same thing over here. We have an opening here. We got these God rays shining through here because I carefully placed a window over here, because that is where I wanted the volumetric fog to shine through. Okay, so if I go back to my camera view and I select this big shadow caster here, pay attention to what happens when I move it. See how that look is totally different now? If I hide this, look at the difference that makes. It is day and night. So that's what I did. There is no shame in using this massive shadow blocker to carefully craft and shape the volumetric fog to do whatever it is you want it to do. We are literally faking those nice God rays to give the desired look. And that is why using volumetric fog is so important. Hey everyone, Future Will here. I just wanted to take a moment to talk about something about the fog that I omitted from the original recording, so let's take a look at that right now. When we have our exponential height fog selected, in the details panel, you can control the directionality of your God rays by using a feature called scattering distribution, which you can find in the volumetric fog tab, okay? So you'll see by default, it is set to 0.2. And if I set this to 1, you'll notice that the fog kind of disappears, but it hasn't really. It just changed functionality. Now pay attention to when I move the camera here. You'll notice that now we've got the kind of God ray shining through the trees like that. If I set the scattering distribution back down to 0.2 again, you'll notice those direct God rays completely disappear again. So like the hot tip says here, the distribution value of 0 scatters equally in all directions, while 0.9 scatters predominantly in the light direction. So if you want to have light shaft visible from the side, it needs to be closer to 0. Again, because it's set to 0.2, which is close to 0, you'll see we see the God rays coming in from the side. But when you increase it closer to 0.9, like so, we get these really cool God rays shining through the leaves of our tree right here. So there's no right or wrong setting to use. It really depends on the art direction that you require. And so I just figured it was something really important to talk about, especially if you're trying to get this kind of look. So with that said, let's go back to past will. So now we already have this with literally only the directional light and the height fog. That's it. The next step involves adding a skylight, because we need to kind of go add a skylight to lift up these shadows a bit, because the shadows here are pitch black. There's no bounce light here, so the skylight's going to help us with that. So we're going to click on lights here, add a skylight in our scene like this, and we're going to set this light to movable. I'm going to set the sky distance threshold to 1, and I'm going to uncheck lower hemisphere solid color. So now you'll see these shadows. If I hide the skylight, see that difference it makes? It really helps lift up those shadows. Now this is a little bit too bright for my taste. I may actually turn that down to like 0.5. There we go. So now we've got a pretty decent lighting setup done. Now we need to art direct it and make it a bit more bluish, because that's the art direction I want to go for. It's what we're used to seeing in movies. Nighttime scenes do look pretty good when they're lit blue, even though that's not technically physically accurate. So I'm going to select my directional light here, and in the details panel, we're going to make this color a little bit bluish. Not too much. Be very careful not to overdo it. But maybe something like that. There we go. That looks pretty decent. And just like that, we're already about 80% of the way done. With those 3 actors, that's it. So the next step involves adding practical light. So a practical light is an actual working light that appears in the scene. So it can be a household lamp, a TV, car headlights, and in this case, it's going to be the candles that are inside each one of these lanterns over here. So we're going to go ahead and add a point light inside each of these lanterns, like this. Now this is way too bright, so I'm going to turn this intensity down to 1, and I'm going to change the color to something more orangey, like that, and I'm going to change it to movable. I'm going to make sure that it is actually inside correctly. There we go. And now I'm going to go ahead and do the same for each and every one of these lanterns in the scene, so I will fast forward this. Now, just like that, adding these practical lights here really helps these lanterns pop a little bit. It adds that extra warmth in it. We get that nice teal and orange look when combined with the blue fog. So these kind of help add a little bit more interest to our scene. Now, we are about 90% of the way there. There is still one last thing we need to do before we're done, and that's adding fill lights and extra rim lights. So these are not exactly realistic lights. These are not something that would be physically accurate, but cinematographers add these extra lights, these fill lights and rim lights, to accentuate the shape and silhouette of things. Because like I said earlier, silhouette and shape is the most important thing when it comes to night lighting. You see here, the silhouette of the lantern, the silhouette of our hero lantern up here, the silhouette of the tree, of all the trees, this is what really stands out. So we're going to go ahead and add some extra little fill lights and some more rim lights to make certain things pop a little bit more, because as you probably noticed, it's going to be really hard to get Moonlight to shine perfectly on all the things you want it to shine on, because, you know, trees are in the way, and then when you move one tree, it just casts shadows in another area that you don't want. So we're going to take a page from the cinematographer's playbook and make our lives a little bit easier by adding some individual, smaller, local fill lights. To give you a perfect example, I'm going to go ahead and add a rect light right here. I'm going to move this like that. And what I want to do is I want to just lift up the shadows on this side, because if I hide this here, notice how this entire lantern is kind of shapeless. Same thing here and here. All of these lanterns kind of feel a little bit shapeless because they're in the shadow and there's fog. We're going to help our scene out by adding some local lights. So this here, obviously way too bright. Set this to movable. And turn this down to 1, 2, 0.5, something like that. And make this blue. A little bit more bluish, so it matches the ambient lighting. Right? Turn... And so now, just this extra little light here really helps make this lantern stand out a little bit. Now, I also don't want this light to affect everything within its attenuation radius. So in the details panel, I'm going to turn the attenuation radius down to 500, 300 maybe. There we go. So it doesn't affect the other lanterns here. So now I'm going to duplicate this rect light, and I'm going to move it back to do the same thing on this lantern here. So notice here how this lantern kind of disappears into mush. Like it did. You don't see the shape of it very well. The only way to fix that is by adding an extra rect light here, and this really suddenly makes it pop a little bit better. So I'm going to turn the brightness down to like 0.2, 0.3, just something, just a little hint of light to make the shape stand out. I'm going to duplicate this again and bring this back to light this lantern over here as well. Because, like I said, Unreal Engine 4 doesn't have good indirect lighting. You would have it in UE5 with Lumen, but we don't have that here. So we have to fake it, somehow. So again, to show you, if I select my 3 rect lights and hide them, see that difference it makes? See how it just helps those lanterns pop a little bit? That is what we're doing here. I also want to add a bit of a rim light over here on this side of the lantern, because I would like to suggest that the light is shining down on it from this side. So I'm going to grab this rect light, duplicate it, move it over here, rotate it like that, just down a little bit maybe, like that. And you'll see before and after, just that subtle rim light helps make it pop a little bit more. I'm going to do the same thing for this lantern over here, because there is skylight shining down from this side. It won't be a strong rim light, but just something to make this edge pop a little bit. I'm just going to duplicate this rect light, bring it over here, and move it like so. Just a tiny, tiny rim light like that. Maybe not very bright, 10 maybe. So this is no rim light, and this is just a tiny little bit. Now, this brings me to my next point, and a very important tool that Unreal has, and that's lighting channels. You'll see here, this rect light is affecting both the lantern and the tree here. I don't want the rect light to affect the tree, so I'm going to use lighting channels to make that light only affect this lantern. So we're going to select this light here. I'm going to go to the details panel, and I'm going to search for channel. And you'll see here, I'm going to uncheck channel 0. Suddenly, it doesn't affect the tree anymore, but it doesn't affect the lantern either. I'm going to turn on channel 1. And now I'm going to select this lantern and make sure that it also has channel 1 enabled. And now, you'll see it gets that rim light, but this light is no longer affecting anything else in the scene. See? Only this lamp. And that's what we want. This is a super handy tool for adding rim lights to objects without having those lights affect anything else in our scene. Be aware, however, that lighting channels don't work with Lumen and UE5. So now I'm going to go do the same thing over here, on this light here. And one thing I like to do as well is fake some indirect lighting over here. Because you'll see here we got some moonlight, strong moonlight, hitting the ground right here. And in real life, it would bounce up and illuminate both of these lanterns here. So we're going to go ahead and add a rect light to do just that. Something like that. You'll see, just to kind of lift up those blacks a little bit. So really, we just want to add a whole bunch of rect lights in our scene to help these lanterns pop a little bit. And I know what you're thinking. This is not performance friendly. This is probably not the best thing to do if you're making a game. But in my case, I'm just trying to make a nice looking shot. So I don't care about how many lights I have. The reason I'm doing this is because A, Unreal Engine 4 doesn't really have good indirect lighting solutions, so we have to fake it. And rect lights are a fantastic way to do that. B, like I said earlier, we're taking a page from the cinematographer's playbook and we're faking rim lights. Lighting nighttime exteriors for a movie is a huge hack. It's all faked anyway. So now we only have one last thing to do, and that's doing the same thing we did here to our main hero lantern in the back. So I'm going to go ahead and grab one of these rect lights. I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to move it all the way back over there. Now, I need to make sure that it's rotated upwards like this. And the reason I'm doing this is because you'll see we do have some strong moonlight shining here, so we would absolutely have some indirect lighting shining here and lighting up the underside of this lantern. So I'm going to fake it with another rect light. Like that, maybe. And you'll see already, it's kind of an interesting rim light here. Now, obviously, that was way too bright, but I think you're starting to get the idea. Or blue, there we go. And just like that, we kind of highlighted the side of our lantern here, which kind of helps it make it pop a little bit more. And that's it. That's really all you need to do to get a decent looking nighttime shot. Let's break this down one more time, just so you have a bit of a refresher. So I'm going to hide these and hide these. So we started off with absolutely nothing more than just a starry sky, added a directional light to simulate our moonlight. Then we added the volumetric fog, which honestly took us 80% of the way there. Like I said earlier, shaping that volumetric fog with other huge props like this in a scene is key to getting a very moody atmosphere, right? Then we went ahead and lifted the shadows a little bit with our skylight, like that. Then we added some local practical lights, like this, just to help simulate that candlelight a bit. And lastly, we added a whole bunch of fill lights and rim lights to our scene to make some of these lanterns stand out. So this is before, and this is after. Before and after. Now again, this is pretty subjective. There's no right or wrong answer here. You're going to have to be the judge, and you're going to have to art direct your scene. So you may actually prefer the before version, and that's okay. I just wanted to take the time to show you that it is an entirely viable approach to just add a whole bunch of smaller lights like this to fake the directionality of the light, fake the indirect lighting, and fake the rim lighting as well. Now, the last thing I would do here is render this shot out using the movie render queue, which I have the tutorial for right here. And from there, I would just color grade this a little bit in DaVinci Resolve. Now, I do have a tutorial on color grading in DaVinci Resolve coming soon, so be sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. Because at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is the end result. If your shot looks gorgeous, the client is happy, you're good to go. And that is how you can go ahead and light a nighttime shot yourself pretty easily. And guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, do consider subscribing and leaving a comment down below. And as always, happy rendering.